What would you do if you discovered your spouse was living a double life? Follow Alex as he uncovers secrets that change everything. Betrayal, heartbreak, and the shocking truth await in this intense real-life story. I'm Alex, 33, living in Seattle, Washington. About 5 years ago, on a late October afternoon as Seattle was shifting into its cold autumn days, I met Rachel for the first time. She was an old friend of Julie, one of my close friends from high school. Julie and I had been close as siblings for years, and she knew me better than almost anyone else. One day, she told me she wanted to introduce me to a friend of hers, Rachel, who had just moved to Seattle to start over after a difficult time. Julie emphasized that Rachel was strong but had been through a lot. We met at a coffee shop near the river called Bean and Leaf, a place where Julie and I often spent hours chatting about everything and nothing. Rachel was a few minutes late, wearing a slightly oversized coat, her face a little worried. But as soon as she saw Julie and me, she gave a soft smile and apologized for the delay. The first thing that struck me about her was her gentle smile and the hint of sadness in her eyes, a unique beauty, not flashy but captivating. We sat and talked through the evening, and I quickly realized that Rachel was a woman who was both independent and warm-hearted. Throughout the evening, she shared small stories, each one revealing a piece of who she was. One of those stories was about Rachel's life back in Oregon. She shared that she used to have a little house with a garden full of flowers. Every weekend morning, Danny, my son, and I would go to the garden and pick a few flowers to put in a vase, she said, her eyes lighting up. I remember Danny was only 3 then, but he was always excited to water the plants and help me pick out the weeds. It was such a simple story, but it showed me that Rachel cherished small things and always tried to make life beautiful for herself and her son, even when life wasn't easy. Rachel also had a deep love for music and enjoyed playing the piano. She told me that when she was young, her family couldn't afford a piano, so she would often stay after school to practice on the school's piano, if her teacher allowed it. That story made me admire her even more. Rachel was someone who found ways to reach for her passions and happiness, even when things were out of reach. Music is my way of keeping calm, she said, her eyes distant as if remembering a part of her past. No matter what happens, sitting down at the piano always brings me back to myself. Then there was a time when Danny, only 4 at the time, fell sick in the middle of the night. Rachel had just moved back in with her parents, and Danny suddenly became feverish. She stayed up all night, placing cold clothes on his forehead and reading him stories to help him sleep. Rachel always told herself that being a single mother would be challenging, but she never let Danny see her exhaustion. This story gave me a window into Rachel's strength and dedication, a woman who was willing to sacrifice anything for her son's happiness. Before long, Rachel and I started dating. She loved visiting the little bookstores around Seattle, and we spent many weekends together exploring each one. I remember one time, she took me to a hidden bookstore she stumbled upon while taking a walk. It was a small shop tucked away down an alley, filled with the scent of old paper and wood that made it feel cozy and timeless. Rachel wandered through each shelf with a kind of quiet joy, like she'd discovered a secret treasure trove. Standing there, watching her turn pages with that serene smile, I realized she was someone who found beauty in simplicity and cherished each moment. Over time, I became close to Danny as well. He was a quiet boy, but once he grew comfortable, he was lively and mischievous. We'd often go to Gasworks Park on Sundays, where he loved to run around and chase squirrels, sometimes pretending he was a hero guarding the park. Once, he looked at me very seriously and asked, "Alex, will you protect my mom?" That innocent question caught me off guard, and from that moment, I promised myself that I'd be there to protect both of them, no matter what. About a year later, as our relationship deepened, Rachel and Danny decided to move in with me. My apartment in Fremont wasn't very big, but it was cozy, and we quickly made it our own. Mornings sipping coffee together, evenings reading books, watching movies, and playing with Danny made me feel like I'd finally found the family I'd always wanted. I encouraged Rachel to go back to school to finish her degree, and with my father's connections, I was able to help her land a stable job at a nearby company. At that time, life felt incredible, as if we had found the peace we had both been searching for all along. But about a year ago, things started to change. Rachel suddenly reconnected with her old college friends, people I had never met but had heard about occasionally. They seemed like a lively, free-spirited crowd, the type who loved long parties and embraced the nightlife as if it were a central part of their identity. At first, I didn't think much of it. Rachel had always been a dedicated wife and mother, focused on raising Danny and building our home together. But she'd also put so much of herself into those roles, and I understood she might need some time for herself, her own space to reconnect with who she was outside of our family. The first time Rachel joined her friends for a girls' night out was on a crisp Saturday evening. I remember watching her spend more time than usual getting ready. She took great care with her makeup, applying every detail with a focus I hadn't seen in years, and slipped on a sleek black dress that I'd almost forgotten she owned. As she emerged from the bedroom, I felt an unexpected wave of nostalgia. She looked radiant, almost like the Rachel from before our lives had become filled with routine, the Rachel who had once been vibrant and carefree. There was a sparkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen in ages, an energy that made me feel both happy for her and strangely uneasy. She gave me a quick, excited kiss and hurried out the door, her heels clicking against the floor with a confident rhythm that lingered even after she'd gone. Alone in the quiet house, I couldn't shake a faint sense of discomfort. After that night, the girls' nights became a monthly event, something she looked forward to with a new kind of enthusiasm. As the weeks passed, I noticed her becoming more and more involved in these outings, often mentioning plans in passing that seemed to pop up last minute, dinners, after-work drinks, even the occasional weekend brunch with her friends. I could tell she was finding a sense of freedom in these get-togethers, a kind of joy that our day-to-day life didn't always provide. At first, it was just a once-a-month outing, but soon, I found myself waiting up more often as she began going out with her colleagues for drinks after work. She would text me that she'd be home late, and when she finally walked through the door, there was always a glow in her eyes, her laughter quick and her stories animated. Seeing her so lively, I couldn't help but smile, but beneath that smile, I could feel a quiet pang of uncertainty. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of her phone lighting up late at night or see her smiling at a message, the screen quickly turned away. I didn't want to intrude, but each time I saw these signs, a small voice in my mind would nudge at me, hinting that maybe there was more to these outings than just a night out with friends. I told myself it was only natural for her to want a break from the responsibilities of motherhood and marriage, that she had every right to have her own time. One evening, she came home unusually late after one of these nights out, her smile wider than usual, her cheeks flushed. She told me about the fun she'd had, laughing about a story involving a new friend who had joined their group, a friend she'd never mentioned before. Her energy was contagious, but I found myself lying awake that night, replaying the way she'd spoken about her new friend. Was I overthinking things? I reminded myself that Rachel deserved her freedom and that I shouldn't let these small details turn into doubts. Still, as the months passed, I couldn't deny that something felt different. Our conversations began to shift too. Rachel would talk about her outings with a kind of excitement that was rare in our usual day-to-day interactions. She seemed energized by this new social life, often mentioning names I'd never heard before, describing places we had never gone together. I tried to listen attentively, to be supportive and understanding, but part of me felt like I was slowly becoming an outsider in her life. I wanted to be happy for her, to see her thrive and find joy, yet there was a lingering sense of something slipping away, a closeness that felt distant, an intimacy that seemed to have been replaced by a series of quick goodbyes and hushed phone calls. One Friday, she came home with a delicate silver bracelet on her wrist, a simple yet elegant piece I hadn't seen before. When I asked her about it, she smiled, saying it was a gift from one of her friends, a memento from a recent girls' night out. She brushed it off lightly, but as I watched her absently play with the bracelet later that night, I felt an uneasy tightness in my chest. Rachel had always been an open book with me, but now there were moments when I sensed a part of her had drifted beyond my reach. Through it all, I kept reminding myself that Rachel deserved her own space. I didn't want to be overbearing or clingy, and I certainly didn't want her to feel like she couldn't pursue her own happiness. But as these once occasional nights turned into a regular part of her life, I couldn't help but wonder if the person she was reconnecting with wasn't just her old friends, but a version of herself that had somehow left me standing on the other side of the door. However, over time, I started to feel a shift in Rachel's behavior. She no longer shared everything with me as openly as she used to. There were times she'd come home from a night out, and instead of telling me about her evening in detail, she'd just say, "It was fun," and quickly change the subject. When I tried asking a bit more about her night or who was there, Rachel would give brief answers, sometimes even showing signs of irritation, as though I were intruding on a part of her life she wanted to keep separate. Any gentle suggestion or question on my part seemed to spark a defensive reaction. She'd accuse me of not trusting her, of trying to control her. Hearing her say that stunned me. I only wanted to understand what was going on in her life. But it seemed that each of my questions only pushed her further away. This gnawing feeling of unease started to settle within me, slowly but undeniably. Every time Rachel went out, I couldn't help but feel my mind turning toward darker thoughts, wondering if she was truly just out with friends to unwind. But I also knew that if I kept questioning and doubting, I'd only end up driving her away. So, I tried to reassure myself, convincing myself that she simply needed time to balance herself, to find some relief from the responsibilities of daily life. Still, the more I tried to reassure myself, the more I felt the closeness we once shared slipping away. As time went on, Rachel seemed to spend more and more of her time on these outings, and she began creating a distance between us, both emotionally and physically. Our late-night conversations, which had once stretched until morning, turned into short exchanges, lacking depth. Some evenings, I would sit alone in the living room, waiting for her to come home, wondering if I was slowly losing the woman I had once known so deeply. Yeah, part of me still clung to the hope that everything would eventually go back to normal, that perhaps I was just overthinking. Then one day, I got an unexpected call from Julie, Rachel's best friend, and also the wife of my close friend Matt. Julie's voice was quiet and hesitant, her words coming out in an almost guarded tone as she said she needed to meet with me urgently. There was a tension in her voice that caught me off guard, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she had to say wouldn't be easy to hear. We agreed to meet that evening at a small cafe downtown, a quiet, dimly lit place where we wouldn't be disturbed. When I arrived, Julie was already seated, nervously stirring her coffee, her gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the cafe window. As I approached, she looked up, her face wearing a troubled expression that made my heart sink. After a brief, tense greeting, she took a deep breath and finally began to speak. "Alex, there's something I think you need to know," she started, her voice barely a whisper. The words felt like a punch to my gut, and I immediately felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I braced myself, half dreading what might come next. Julie shifted uncomfortably in her seat, struggling to find the right words. She explained that, during the recent nights out, Rachel had been acting differently, behaving in ways that had raised concerns among our friends. "It's not just that she's been more social," Julie said, choosing her words carefully. "Rachel's been getting unusually close with a few men in the group or with random acquaintances they've met at the bar." She paused, glancing up at me as if gauging my reaction. I could feel my heart pounding, but I gestured for her to continue. Julie took another deep breath before going on, lowering her voice as she shared details that sent a chill through me. "Alex, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious. There have been times when Rachel's flirtatious behavior has gone a little too far," she admitted, her eyes full of discomfort. "At first, I thought maybe she was just having fun, letting loose a bit, but others started noticing. There was even a night when she let a guy put his hand on her shoulder, and she didn't pull away. It might sound small, but it didn't feel right to me." Julie's voice grew quiet, her gaze falling to the table, and I could see a hint of sadness in her expression. I sat in stunned silence, struggling to process her words. It was as if a part of my reality was beginning to crumble, the trust I'd always placed in Rachel feeling suddenly fragile. Julie continued, almost as if sensing my disbelief. "Alex, I know this is hard to hear, and believe me, I didn't want to be the one to bring it up. but I thought you deserved to know, before things got worse. I've tried talking to Rachel about it, gently asking her if everything was okay between you two, but she just brushed it off, saying she was just having harmless fun. I wanted to believe her, but her voice trailed off, and she looked away, as if the weight of what she was revealing was almost too much to bear. I felt a swirl of emotions rising within me: anger, confusion, a profound sadness. How had things gotten to this point? I had always trusted Rachel implicitly, believing in the strength of our relationship. But now, a nagging question had crept into my mind, one that I couldn't ignore. Was there something I had overlooked? Had I missed signs of discontent or change within her that had driven her to seek this kind of attention? Julie placed a gentle hand on mine, breaking me out of my thoughts. Alex, I'm telling you this because I care about both of you. I know how much you love Rachel and how hard you've worked to build a beautiful life together. I just don't want to see things fall apart because of something that could have been prevented. Her eyes held a mixture of worry and sympathy, and I could tell this wasn't easy for her to discuss. Sitting there in the cafe, the world outside seemed to blur as I tried to come to terms with what I'd just heard. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself that maybe Julie had misread the situation or that Rachel's behavior was nothing more than innocent fun. But Julie's words lingered in my mind, each one casting a shadow of doubt that felt impossible to ignore. As we parted ways that evening, I knew that the days ahead would require courage to confront the truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. Hearing this, I didn't know how to react. Part of me froze, unable to believe that the woman I loved and trusted could be behaving this way. But another part of me didn't want to believe it, trying to reason that maybe things weren't as bad as they sounded. Instead of reacting immediately, I just sat there, feeling everything around me blur, like this story wasn't about me and Rachel at all. Julie paused, then continued, I wasn't sure if I should tell you. Honestly, I didn't want to make you uncomfortable. But I thought you should know, at least so you can have a clear perspective on things. Rachel just doesn't seem like herself anymore. That night, I barely slept. The mix of hurt and unease weighed on my chest, keeping me wide awake. I replayed Julie's words over and over, each one like a small cut to my pride. Could Rachel truly need freedom so much that she'd seek excitement elsewhere? Or was she just so tired of our life together that she didn't want to come back home to me? The next morning, I still couldn't shake off these thoughts. Sitting alone in the living room with my coffee, I thought back to every happy moment we'd shared, the Sunday mornings at the park with Danny, the nights watching movies, laughing together. The more I reflected, the emptier I felt. It was as if those moments belonged to some distant time, and the present was nothing more than an empty shell. In the end, I decided I had to see for myself. The confusion and unease had grown too strong to ignore. That evening, Rachel told me she'd be going out for drinks with her friends at a bar downtown. I pretended to be supportive, hiding my concern as best as I could. The moment she left, I quickly changed and got in my car, following her with a heavy heart. I knew this wasn't the right thing to do, but I felt driven by the need to witness everything with my own eyes. The bar Rachel had chosen was a lively spot downtown, filled with neon lights and pulsing music that drowned out every other sound. I found a shadowed corner to sit, where I could watch her without being noticed. My gaze wandered through the crowd until it settled on her. Rachel was standing by the bar, chatting and laughing with a man I'd never seen before. She looked happy and relaxed, as if she hadn't a single care about her family waiting for her back at home. The decision to follow Rachel weighed on me, heavy and unsettling, yet I felt I had no other choice. After so many nights haunted by doubt, by the gnawing unease that had taken root in my mind, I needed clarity, even if it hurt. That evening, as Rachel got ready to go out, I forced myself to put on a calm facade. I smiled and nodded when she kissed me goodbye, the warmth of her lips a painful contrast to the cold dread I felt inside. My heart twisted as I watched her walk out the door, and the silence that settled over the house felt sharper, somehow emptier than usual. The moment she left, I changed quickly and grabbed my keys, barely registering my own actions as I stepped outside and started the car. A part of me knew this was wrong, that following her felt like an act of desperation, of distrust. But after everything, I couldn't ignore the doubts anymore. I needed to know what was happening, to see for myself if my fears were justified or if they'd just been shadows in my mind. As I drove, my thoughts spiraled between hope and dread. Memories of our time together flashed through my mind, the laughter we'd shared, the quiet evenings at home, the promises we'd made. I tried to focus on those moments, to convince myself that what I was about to witness would be harmless, that Rachel would simply be out with friends. But no matter how much I tried to reassure myself, the sick feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. The bar was a popular downtown spot, neon lights flickering in the night and casting colors across the street as music pulsed through the walls. The laughter and chatter from inside echoed out onto the street, a world of careless enjoyment that felt completely detached from the turmoil in my heart. I hesitated before entering, my hand resting on the door as I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever I might see. Inside, the bar was packed, a blur of people moving and swaying to the music. I slipped into a shadowed corner near the back, careful to stay hidden. My eyes scanned the crowd, heart pounding, until they settled on her. There she was, standing by the bar, illuminated by the vibrant lights, looking carefree and happy. She was laughing, her smile wide and genuine as she leaned in to talk to a man I'd never seen before. He was close, too close, resting a hand on her arm as they spoke, and she didn't pull away. Watching her like this, my heart felt like it was breaking in slow motion. She looked so at ease, as if the family and home we'd built together were a distant memory. There was a lightness in her posture, a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in so long, and I realized with a painful clarity that she didn't carry the weight of our life together here. I was left wondering if she ever did. I wanted to believe that this was innocent, that maybe he was just a friend or someone she'd met through our other friends. But every small gesture between them, the way she'd lean in closer, the way he'd brush her arm lightly, felt like tiny cuts, each one deepening the ache inside me. I told myself to leave, to turn around and forget what I'd seen, but I was rooted to the spot, my eyes fixed on her. As they talked, she occasionally glanced at her phone, and each time, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe she was thinking of me, that she'd remember the family waiting for her at home. But then she'd laugh again, her focus returning to the man beside her, and any hope I'd felt slipped away, replaced by a hollow emptiness. The car ride home was silent and tense, with Rachel looking out the window and me gripping the wheel, trying to keep my emotions in check. Finally, unable to hold it in, I asked her why she'd let that guy touch her so casually. She turned to me, eyes flashing with frustration, telling me I was overreacting and that I shouldn't have shown up unannounced. "Don't you trust me, Alex?" she asked, her tone defensive. Back at home, Rachel continued to explain, trying to justify it as just a harmless bit of fun. She said her friends were simply playful, and I'd misunderstood everything. "I just needed to unwind a bit, Alex. At home, I'm always the responsible one, the mom, the partner. I just wanted a bit of freedom, some space," she said, her voice softening as she looked down, as if hoping for my understanding. "He's just a friend. It was nothing to me, just a fun night." As much as I wanted to be understanding, I couldn't shake the image of that man's hand on her shoulder and the carefree smile she had worn. I told Rachel that letting someone else touch her like that, so casually, was disrespectful to our relationship. She sighed, then continued to explain that she'd had too much to drink, that she'd lost control for a moment, and hadn't thought much about it. She promised it wouldn't happen again. Rachel went on, saying, "You don't get it, Alex. Being a single mom for so long, I got used to a certain freedom, making my own decisions without having to answer to anyone. Sometimes, I just need to feel that again. It wasn't about hurting you or our family. It's just, sometimes I feel like I need some space." Her voice was low, almost as if she were trying to convince herself that it was all really that simple. After a while, she looked me in the eyes, apologizing for letting things go too far. She said she understood why I felt hurt and promised she'd try to change, to not let things get out of hand again. I felt somewhat reassured by her words, but the heaviness in my heart remained. In the end, I decided to give Rachel another chance, on the condition that we go to couples therapy to work through these issues. Rachel agreed, seeming genuinely willing, and for a while, things seemed to calm down. We made an effort to repair our relationship, to regain the closeness we once had. But even though things seemed normal on the surface, I still felt a lingering sense of worry and doubt. The images from that night stayed with me, hovering in my mind, making it hard to fully let go. 2 months later, Rachel changed again. She started treating her phone as if it were an extension of herself, never leaving it out of sight and always stepping out of the room whenever a message or call came in. Even when it was just the two of us, she couldn't go a few minutes without checking her phone, which only deepened my growing sense of unease. When I asked, she would give a faint smile and say it was just work, brushing off my concerns. But this feeling of doubt continued to gnaw at me, despite my attempts to convince myself it was nothing serious. One evening, I decided to meet with Julie and Matt. Julie had always been a close friend I could confide in, and this time, I felt like I needed to share my concerns. As I spoke, I noticed Julie's expression growing tense. She listened in silence, her eyes cast downward, as if debating whether to say something difficult. Finally, after a long pause, she took a deep breath and looked at me, her voice soft but steady. "There's something I think you should know." I felt a knot tighten in my chest as I waited for her to continue, sensing the weight of what she was about to say. Julie hesitated, glancing away for a moment before looking back at me, gathering her courage. "I heard from someone that Rachel has reconnected with her ex in Houston." She paused, as if gauging my reaction before continuing. I could see the discomfort on her face, as though she hated to be the one telling me this. "And what worries me most," Julie's voice softened even further, almost to a whisper, "is that when friends questioned her, Rachel just joked about it, saying that if she could keep both men happy without you finding out, then what's the harm?" Each word felt like a knife cutting deeper into my heart. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this. Julie reached out and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, her expression filled with sympathy. "I know it's hard to believe, but you deserve to know the truth. I wish it were just a rumor, that maybe I'm wrong, but hearing her joke about it like that, I couldn't help but be concerned for you." I remained motionless, feeling as if my entire world was collapsing beneath me. Julie's words echoed in my mind, painting a vivid picture of Rachel's casual remark about keeping both men happy. Julie looked at me with deep compassion, and I could sense the sincerity behind her words. But inside, all I felt was a hollow emptiness and a pain I couldn't describe. I tried to reassure myself, telling myself that perhaps it was just gossip, that Rachel hadn't truly crossed any lines. But her recent actions, coupled with her evasive responses, only added to my discomfort. Sleepless nights followed, as I lay awake wondering if I should confront Rachel directly. Yet the fear of discovering an unbearable truth held me back. Instead, I chose silence, hoping that Rachel would come to her senses, that she'd realize her actions were risking everything we had built together. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that things would never be the same. As Rachel prepared for the wedding out of state, I tried to push aside the small, nagging feeling that something was amiss. Danny's ear infection had provided a perfect excuse for me to stay behind, freeing Rachel to attend the event with her friends. I told myself that letting her go alone was a sign of trust, of confidence in our relationship, but deep down, I was aware of a faint unease that refused to quiet. I reassured myself that my recent doubts were just in my head. For our family's sake, I needed to believe in her. On the evening of the wedding, after finally getting Danny to sleep, I poured myself a drink and sat alone in the silence of the house. The absence of Rachel, usually such a comforting presence beside me, felt unusually heavy. I picked up my phone reflexively, scrolling through photos of us together, moments that once felt so solid, so real. I was doing everything I could to convince myself that these feelings of doubt were unnecessary. Then my phone rang. Seeing Matt's name on the screen sent a jolt through me. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, an almost imperceptible pause as he struggled with the words. "I need to show you something," he finally said, his tone somber. My heart started pounding, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. After a brief, tense pause, Matt sent me a series of photos followed by a video. I remember staring at the screen, too afraid to open them, feeling a hollow ache in my chest as my mind raced through worst-case scenarios. My hands were trembling as I opened the first image, and the world as I knew it shifted. There, in vivid, undeniable clarity, was Rachel standing in the lobby of the hotel, locked in a kiss with a man I didn't recognize at first but quickly realized was her ex. The initial shock hit me like a punch to the gut, stealing the breath from my lungs. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself that maybe it was a misunderstanding, but as I opened each subsequent photo, any hope I had of denying it vanished. The final video Matt sent left no room for doubt. They were laughing, talking closely, sharing the kind of intimacy that once belonged to us. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, each second of the video feeling like a slow-motion replay of everything I'd feared. The warmth in her eyes, the familiarity in their body language, this wasn't just an old friend. In that instant, I felt my entire reality shatter. The images seared themselves into my mind, replaying like a torturous loop. Everything I believed in, everything I'd built with her, was gone. I sat in a daze, the silence around me crushing, the weight of betrayal sinking deeper with each passing moment. Without a second thought, I grabbed my keys, barely aware of what I was doing as I stumbled out to the car. The 6-hour drive loomed ahead, but all I could focus on was the overwhelming need to see it for myself, to confront her. I needed answers. I needed her to look me in the eye and explain how she could do this. The drive felt endless, each mile stretching into an eternity. My mind was racing, replaying every memory, every touch, every whispered promise we'd shared. How could she betray us, betray me, in this way? The images from the photos and video haunted me, fueling a mixture of rage, disbelief, and unimaginable pain. The road ahead blurred as my mind spiraled, bouncing between memories of happier times and the devastating reality I was now forced to confront. Every glance at the clock only made the ache worse, reminding me how much time I'd invested in a lie. By the time I pulled up to the hotel, dawn was breaking, casting a cold, indifferent light over the building. The world outside continued, oblivious to the storm raging within me. As I sat in the parking lot, my hands clutched the steering wheel, knuckles white. I was paralyzed, torn between the need for answers and the fear of what I'd find. I took a deep, shaky breath, willing myself to find the strength to face her. Standing outside Rachel's hotel room, I felt the full weight of betrayal bearing down on me, each second ticking by like an eternity. My hand hovered above the door, but I hesitated, wrestling with a strange, desperate hope that everything was a misunderstanding, that there was still some part of Rachel that I could trust. But the images Matt had sent replayed in my mind, each one stripping away that last sliver of denial. My hand shook, and my breathing was ragged as I steadied myself. This was it. I needed to confront her, to get the answers that had been tearing me apart for the past hours of that long, torturous drive. I knocked, the sound of each knock growing louder, more forceful, as my anger swelled within me. With each heartbeat, a surge of pain and fury pulsed through me, nearly choking me as I waited, each second drawing out the excruciating agony of this betrayal. On the third knock, the door finally creaked open. Rachel stood before me, wrapped in a hotel robe, her eyes widening in shock as she took in the sight of me. Her face was a mixture of guilt and fear, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But that softness vanished as reality crashed down. I didn't say a word, I couldn't. The silence hung heavy between us, thick with unspoken accusations and the shattering of everything we once shared. Without giving her a chance to speak, I pushed past her, my eyes scanning the room. My heart sank when I saw him, her ex, lying on the bed, unbothered, his face holding an expression of indifference, almost arrogance. There he was, sprawled out as if he belonged there, as if he hadn't just taken everything I'd held dear and torn it apart. At that moment, something inside me snapped. The tidal wave of anger, pain, and betrayal surged forward, releasing a fury that I'd held back for too long. Without thinking, without reason, I lunged at him, my fists crashing down as I let out everything I had kept buried, the sleepless nights, the creeping doubts, the humiliation. Each blow felt like an attempt to erase the agony, to rid myself of the images that had seared into my mind. Rachel's voice broke through the haze, her screams filling the room as she begged me to stop, but her words sounded distant, muffled by the overwhelming noise of my own heartbeat. Her pleas were like whispers against the storm raging inside me, powerless to break through the rage that had taken over. All I could hear was the echo of my own pain, each strike releasing a piece of the torment that had consumed me. I didn't know how long I kept going. Time had become meaningless, each moment stretched and distorted by the red haze that clouded my vision. The pain of betrayal morphed into something darker, something I could only vent through raw, physical anger. I felt nothing but a hollow, burning ache inside as my fists continued to strike, and with each impact, I hoped to quiet the agony that screamed within me. It wasn't until I felt hands gripping my arms, pulling me back, that I returned to reality. A group of hotel security guards had entered the room, and I struggled against their hold, the adrenaline still coursing through me as I tried to break free. But as they pulled me back, the weight of what I had done, of what had just unfolded, began to settle over me like a cold, heavy blanket. I looked around the room, my chest heaving as the reality of the moment hit me. Rachel stood near the door, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Her ex lay on the bed, bruised and battered, groaning in pain. The guards held me tightly, their expressions a mixture of alarm and disgust, and in their grip, I felt the rage slowly drain, leaving only a hollow, aching emptiness. The sound of Rachel's voice trembled as she spoke my name, pleading with me, but her words felt distant, detached from the woman I thought I'd known. In that instant, I realized that nothing between us could ever be repaired, that what I'd just witnessed, and the fury I had unleashed, had destroyed whatever was left of our relationship. Pinned down by the guards, I looked over and saw him gasping for air, his face bruised and swollen. The police arrived within minutes, handcuffing me while he was loaded onto a stretcher and rushed to the hospital. Sitting in the police car, the weight of what I'd done began to sink in. Regret and despair gnawed at me, but it was too late to turn back. At the police station, they placed me in a cold, empty interrogation room. I felt hollow, the disappointment and grief clawing at me from within. Rachel and her ex wasted no time filing charges against me for assault. When the officers allowed me to call my lawyer, I sat there, waiting in the freezing room, each second dragging painfully. I couldn't believe that just hours ago, I was home caring for our son, believing our family was safe and whole. Now, everything has crumbled. After hours of paperwork, my lawyer finally managed to secure my release. When I stepped out of the police station, I paused, breathing in the cold Seattle night air. It felt as frigid and empty as my own heart. I drove back home, my mind reeling with confusion and despair. In the days that followed, I felt like a ghost. Life became hollow, eating, working, sleeping, all reduced to meaningless routines. A part of me felt dead from the moment I saw Rachel's betrayal with my own eyes. Rachel tried desperately to reach me, texting and calling, pleading for a chance to explain. But each time I saw her name on my screen, a heavy weight settled on my chest, the pain and anger surging back. In moments of weakness, I found myself reminiscing about our happier days. The beautiful memories that once filled me with joy now only intensified my heartache. Part of me wanted to forgive, to salvage what little remained of our relationship, but deep down, I knew that was impossible. The anger, the hurt, and the disappointment were too great to overcome. I had lost too much, and there was no going back. In the end, I made the difficult decision to leave the house we had once built together. I took Danny and a few belongings, leaving everything else behind. Each step out the door felt like a fresh wound, but I knew there was no other choice. My heart ached with sorrow and regret, but I reminded myself that I needed to move forward, for Danny and for myself. Rachel continued to try to reach out, begging for forgiveness, but her words meant nothing to me now. I had seen the betrayal with my own eyes, and felt the devastation of her choices. At that moment, I understood that love has its limits. Once trust is broken, some things can never be mended. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I believed I could endure it, because I still had Danny, my one remaining hope, my reason to keep going. A week after trying to pick myself up and forget everything, I was beginning to find a small sense of peace. Nights were still difficult. I'd sit quietly on the balcony, staring into the dark, trying to erase the painful memories. Then, one afternoon, while I was working, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. my heart skipped a beat for reasons I couldn't explain. I picked up the phone and read the brief message. "This is Daniel, Rachel's ex. We need to talk. There are things you should know." The short message sent waves of confusion through me. Daniel, the man who had shattered my happiness, now wanted to meet and explain? I gripped the phone, my heart pounding with anger and curiosity. Part of me wanted to delete the message, to avoid any further confrontation with him. But another part of me wanted answers, to know if there was anything I hadn't yet discovered about Rachel's betrayal. Could it be worth facing the man who had caused me such pain? My mind was flooded with conflicting thoughts. That night, I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning as I weighed the choice in my head. The next morning, standing in front of the mirror, I stared at my own reflection, feeling uncertain. After all I had been through, did I have the courage to confront him? Eventually, maybe because of the intensity of my inner struggle, I decided to respond to Daniel's message and agreed to meet him. The meeting took place at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. I arrived early, choosing a hidden corner where I could observe the entire room. Sitting there, every second felt agonizingly long. My mind was a swirl of anger, curiosity, and a strange urge to understand. When Daniel finally arrived, he looked tired, his face marked by a weariness I hadn't expected. He walked over, took a seat across from me, and for a few moments, we simply sat in silence, as though trying to read each other's intentions. Finally, Daniel broke the silence, his voice low and hoarse, like a man carrying a heavy burden. "I didn't think you would actually meet me." I remained silent, arms folded, waiting for him to continue. Daniel took a deep breath and began to recount his version of events, his relationship with Rachel, how he had been unable to control his emotions, how he had felt swept along by something beyond him. Each word felt like a knife, cutting through what little strength I had left. My grip on the table tightened with each painful detail he shared. He went on about their late-night conversations, the moments they shared when I had no idea. About how she had confided in him about her unhappiness in our marriage, feelings I had never known she held. I forced myself to stay calm, but every fiber of my being was tense with rage. "Do you think telling me this will make me forgive you both?" I interrupted, my voice cold and bitter. Daniel hesitated, then looked at me with a pained expression. "No, I don't expect that," he replied, his tone quiet and sad. "I just think, after everything, you deserve to know the truth. Rachel loved you, but she was hurting." That statement left me frozen, as if a bucket of ice had been poured over me. My chest felt tight, and I didn't know what to do with the mix of emotions rising inside. On one hand, I couldn't forgive either of them, but on the other, I felt a strange sadness knowing that Rachel had carried her own hidden pain. Daniel continued, his words digging deeper into parts of me I'd kept closed off, revealing shadows of the relationship I'd never seen. When he finished speaking, I could only sit there in silence, feeling as if the ground had given way beneath me. Without a word, I stood and walked out of the cafe, numb. On the drive home, I felt hollow, as if everything around me was fading. Did the truth he shared with me actually help, or had it only deepened my wound? That question lingered, haunting me long after I left.